Welcome to 1189, an online Bible commentary. My name is Tyler Marson, and I am very pleased to announce big news with you guys today. We're at Genesis chapter 50, the last chapter of Genesis. By the end of this video, we'll have gone through an entire book of the Bible, one chapter at a time. So let's start by kind of speed running the whole book so far. God created a good and perfect world, but humans rejected it when they chose their own wisdom over God's plan. That introduced into the world pain, suffering, death, which we remember is the opposite of the good life that God is the one who generously gives. And that pain and suffering and death spiraled out of control as humans used their God-given life and ingenuity to try and take whatever they could on their own terms. But God loved His creation, right? He loved the world He created. He loved the humans He created. And so He promises to send restoration. He delivers a judgment through the flood that purifies the earth, but it doesn't change the hearts of men. And so God promised that He would restore His perfect world in a different way. And He promised that it would be through the descendant of one man, Abraham. Now, Abraham was sometimes faithful to God, he sometimes wasn't, but ultimately he trusted in God's provision. And God gave him a son, and God promised that his descendants would fill the land of Canaan. But Abraham's grandson, Jacob, threatens to throw all that away. He is a mess growing up, right? He acted very snaky, very snake-like, right? He was deceiving people like his brother and his father, and it led to him being exiled from the land of Canaan, the land he was supposed to inherit. Yet God chose Jacob to be the vehicle of His blessing, and He brought Jacob back to Canaan. He was with him every step of the way. And that was even through Jacob's hesitancy in exile, right? He was fighting with God, and God changes his name to Israel, which means struggles with God. Now, Jacob, in the tenure of his exile, surrounded by scandal, ended up having 12 sons. And 10 of those sons hated one in particular, Joseph. His brothers sold him into slavery, and Joseph experienced a life of hardship and suffering, even though he was persistently faithful to God and God's plan. And so God raised him up from being a lowly criminal in an Egyptian dungeon to being second in command in all of Egypt. He was a ruler, a deliverer, a savior to a generation of people when a famine hit. And through his wisdom, relying on God's wisdom, Joseph was able to save his family and a lot of the families of the earth. And when Joseph's brothers came down to Egypt, Joseph didn't rebuke them or try to kill them, try to get revenge. He set up a little mini paradise and accepted them back into his family. The whole book of Genesis, hopefully you can see, is a microcosm of the whole biblical story going forward, with the righteous, suffering Joseph, who is set at the climax of Genesis, representing Jesus Christ down the line. Jesus is going to bring ultimate restoration, ultimate paradise. But right now, at the end of the story here in Genesis 50, we still see that there is death from the corruption of the sin of mankind. Then Joseph fell on his father's face and wept over him and kissed him. Joseph commanded his servants, the physicians, to embalm his father, so the physicians embalmed Israel. Now 40 days were required for it, for such is the period required for embalming, and the Egyptians wept for him for 70 days. So Jacob dies. And Joseph, all of Joseph's brothers, and really all of Egypt mourn for him. It's a sign of the good reputation that Jacob had, and it reminds us of the good reputation Abraham had living amongst the pagan Canaanites. In the same way, we as Christians should have good reputations among our non-Christian neighbors. We should be loving and peaceful and gentle towards them. The way you live your life shouldn't give anyone who's not a Christian a reason not to convert. When the days of mourning for him were past, Joseph spoke to the household of Pharaoh, saying, "If I now have found favor in your sight, please speak to Pharaoh, saying, My father made me swear, saying, Behold, I am about to die. In my grave which I dug for myself in the land of Canaan, there you shall bury me. Now therefore, please let me go up and bury my father, and then I will return." Pharaoh said, "Go up and bury your father, as he made you swear." So we remember from a few chapters ago that Joseph vowed to his father to bring him back to Canaan and bury him there where Abraham and Sarah and Isaac and Rebekah and Leah are all buried. And even Pharaoh recognizes the gravity of that vow, the importance of Jacob being buried in Canaan. So Joseph went up to bury his father, and with him went up all the servants of Pharaoh, the elders of the household, and all the elders of the land of Egypt, and all the household of Joseph, and his brothers, and his father's household. They left only their little ones and their flocks and their herds in the land of Goshen. There also went up with them both chariots and horsemen, and it was a very great company. And so Joseph loads up everyone, and I mean everyone, right? His own family, Joseph's brothers' families, the servants of Pharaoh, the elders of Egypt. They are all on this caravan together to mourn for Jacob. It's just this huge funeral procession that shows how important Jacob was to the people around him. When they came to the threshing floor of Atad, which is beyond the Jordan, they lamented there with a very great and sorrowful lamentation, and he observed 7 days mourning for his father. Now when the inhabitants of the land, the Canaanites, saw the mourning at the threshing floor of Atad, they said, "This is a grievous mourning for the Egyptians." Therefore it was named Abel Mezraim, which is beyond the Jordan. So not insignificantly, they spend a week, 7 days, mourning the death of Jacob. Remember, all of Genesis started with 7 days of creation. Now we get 7 days mourning creation's imperfection, mourning death. Now the surrounding Canaanites take notice of all this, and they see how many Egyptians are there. And they call the place what would be translated in English as the weeping of the Egyptians. Of course, ironically, the one who died wasn't an Egyptian, it was Israel, who lived in Canaan. Thus the sons did for him as he had charged them. For his sons carried him into the land of Canaan, and buried him in the cave of the field of Machpelah before Mamre, which Abraham had bought, along with the field for a burial site, from Ephron the Hittite. After he had buried his father, Joseph returned to Egypt, he and his brothers, and all who had gone up with him to bury his father. When Joseph's brothers saw that their father was dead, they said, "What if Joseph bears a grudge against us, and pays us back in full for all the wrong which we did to him?" So notably, the brothers still feel guilty about what they did to Joseph all those years ago, and they start thinking, hey, what if Jacob was the only reason Joseph didn't take vengeance on us? What if he's still holding a grudge? We remember back in chapter 27, that's what Esau was planning to do. He said, once my father dies and the time of mourning is over, I'm going to kill Jacob. Well, now all of Jacob's sons are thinking, what if Joseph is planning to do that same thing? So they sent a message to Joseph saying, "Your father charged before he died, saying, 'Thus you shall say to Joseph, Please forgive, I beg you, the transgression of your brothers and their sin, for they did you wrong. And now please forgive the transgression of the servants of the God of your father.' And Joseph wept when they spoke to him." And so, because the brothers are afraid, they send this message to Joseph, saying that Jacob's dying wish was for Joseph to forgive his brothers. Now, if this was really one of Jacob's dying wishes, we don't have record of it, right? Maybe the brothers are trying to manipulate the grieving Joseph just as they manipulated the grieving Jacob back when they gave Jacob Joseph's coat covered in blood and said that he was dead. Then his brothers also came and fell down before him and said, "Behold, we are your servants." And so once again, just like they've done before, and just like Joseph's dream, his brothers bow down to him out of fear. When he shows up, they think that maybe he's still angry and he is going to get revenge, or maybe that their deception got uncovered. And so just like all of their ancestors, they are acting out of fear. But this is what Joseph says. But Joseph said to them, "Do not be afraid, for am I in God's place? As for you, you meant evil against me, but God meant it for good in order to bring about this present result, to preserve many people alive. So therefore, do not be afraid. I will provide for you and your little ones." So he comforted them and spoke kindly to them. Joseph isn't angry. He doesn't punish them or try to get revenge. He forgives them instead. And it's not because they've made up for anything, but because while they definitely meant for evil to happen to Joseph, God has taken that evil intention and turned it for good. God used all of that suffering that Joseph had to endure to deliver him and his family and all of the families of the earth. And it's a reminder how God uses every circumstance to bring about his glory and the good of those who are called according to his purpose, as Paul says in Romans 8. And Joseph is going to use the generous deliverance he was offered, and he's going to generously give forgiveness to his brothers. And let's also remember that this evil that was done against Joseph, it didn't start with Joseph's brothers, right? These verses are the thesis statement of Genesis. Let's remember that Joseph's brothers only did what they did because of the sins of Jacob and Leah and Rachel and Laban. And that only happened because of the sins of Isaac and Rebekah and Esau. And those only happened because of the sins of Abraham and Sarah and Ishmael, which happened because of the sins of Lot and Sodom and Babylon and Nimrod. And that came about because of the sins of Ham and the Nephilim and Cain and the serpent. But God has taken that parade of bad choices and turned it into deliverance, turned it into something good. He took human wisdom resulting in suffering and pain and death and turned it into a blessing for all the families of the earth. And ultimately, it's a picture of Jesus. Through Jesus, God took all the sin of the world and nailed it to a cross and crucified it. But even in Jesus' death, God even turned that for good. He raised Jesus from the dead. He gave him the authority to one day set the entire world right and restore all of creation, crushing the head of the serpent once and for all. Now Joseph stayed in Egypt, he and his father's household, and Joseph lived 110 years. Joseph saw the third generation of Ephraim's sons, and also the sons of Machir, the son of Manasseh, were born on Joseph's knees. Joseph said to his brothers, "I am about to die, but God will surely take care of you and bring you up from this land to the land which he promised on oath to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob." Then Joseph made the sons of Israel swear, saying, "God will surely take care of you, and you shall carry my bones up from here." So Joseph died at the age of 110 years, and he was embalmed and placed in a coffin in Egypt. So once again, we see that deliverance that Joseph brought lasted for a generation or two, but it was only a glimpse of the major ultimate restoration to come. And Joseph lives a long and happy life, and so do his brothers, and so do his kids. But as that generation is dying off, Joseph has his sons promise to also bring his remains back to Canaan, the same way that Joseph himself brought Jacob's remains back to Canaan. And until God calls the sons of Israel back to their promised land, Joseph is set in a coffin in Egypt. So the end of Joseph's life is characterized by this abundance that he has right now, and this abundance that's coming, this not yet abundance that's going to come whenever his descendants are taken back to Canaan. And this tension between the right now and the not yet is the same tension we live in today, right now. God has turned all of our sin, shame, and suffering to good through Jesus' death and resurrection. And he offers us an abundant life that we can enjoy today, right now, even though we know that not everything is perfect yet. We have abundance right now, but we also know that a future abundance, even more than we could ask or imagine, is coming. And that's going to be God's perfect new creation, filled with people who only act by his wisdom. No one will any longer be tempted by the powers of sin and death and ambition and pride. Instead, we'll all be united and ruled by the image of God, Jesus Christ, on the throne. That day is coming. But until then, we live quiet, happy, and abundant lives like Joseph. Because that future abundance, through Jesus, can be in our hearts right now when we trust in him and follow his wisdom. Thanks for watching 1189. We're 50 down and 1139 to go. So we've got a long ways still to go, but we finished the book of Genesis. Guys, thank you so much for watching. I hope you have a good day. God bless.